Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to another Sociology of Media Voices series. And today we've got an important topic that's being debated over the years and has gone through periods of where there is more visibility than other times. But in recent years, there has been an increasing amount of awareness about the exploitation that is faced by backpackers coming to Australia, wanting to see the country and then wanting to earn some money. And what we have found was that a lot of these farms that these backpackers were getting work on were actually getting work, but they had to do a hell of a lot of work for very little rewards. And it has impacted on their health and well-being. And we've seen that in recent years with, unfortunately, the backpacker murders that occurred in Sydney with the Ivan Milat situation, which has sort of risen a bit more about the kind of vulnerabilities of people who are backpacking around Australia. And then in recent years with the pandemic, just how much we are dependent on that part of the economy that doesn't really want to know much about this area. But we're going to highlight this because it's an important area by two people who are really passionate and have a story to share with everybody. And that is Andrew Bretherton and Christina Stenseth. I probably know if my pronunciation isn't the best, but we'll first start with Christina. If you can tell us a little bit about your story and the 88-day slave movement that you've created and started.
All right, so I wouldn't say I started it because it's been an ongoing issue for so long, but I came to Australia 10 years ago on a working holiday visa. So that's what sparked this whole movie that I'm making called 88 Days a Slave. So I was working on a farm, picking onions, working for piece rate, working hard for little reward. So $3.75 an hour is what it amounted to.
Let's just get this right. $3.75 an hour.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
16-hour days. It's it's unbelievable. Picking onions.
How is that even allowed? Was that actually legal?
But it's a loophole, piece rate. The farmer or the labor hire contractor, whoever decides, they set the piece rate on the day.
On the day.
And it's just, I've been doing research into this film I'm making for over 2 years now, and I've interviewed over 50 working holiday makers, all with different experiences, and they all tell stories about how, one example, one day the piece rate was, let's say, $4. And then the farmer comes the next day and says, oh no, you were working too efficient yesterday, so I'm gonna put the piece rate to $2 today. Stuff like that. So
my gosh, Christina, and just having that fluctuation in wage, dare I say the word wage, because it's embarrassing to say that. What would happen if the worker says, well, that's nothing, why can't I get the same amount? What would happen to that worker?
They would get fired and replaced by someone else. And the reason people, especially backpackers, put up with this is because they are working towards a second-year visa or a third-year visa, because that is the carrot. You need to complete 88 days of farm work in order to get your second-year visa.
Okay, so there's like a catch-22 for a lot of the workers today, in order for them to continually be able to stay in the country and see more of Australia. And what gets to me when I hear these stories is that the country like that we're in at the moment benefits from the tourism and people like yourselves spending money, going visiting, yet we treat workers so poorly. Christina, what's sort of your experience? Why is it that so many people in Australia don't hear about this or don't take action to this?
Well, I think it would be different if it was young Australians overseas this was happening to. But because, it's us and them, migrant workers, Australians. But I do believe that, individuals who hear about this, they are disgusted.
Mm.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, Christina, spending, say, 16 hours digging up from the soil, say that, what impact does it have on your physical dexterity of your hands? Like after so many hours doing that work, I'm just thinking about things like work cover and protections. Are there protections?
Well, in my case, I was paid cash in hand. It was probably not registered. I know that I signed a contract because that was the thing. I couldn't leave because they were holding my passport because I signed this agreement that I was going to work. So it took about a week before they returned it to me and I could leave. As for work cover, I don't know. I had, travel insurance because I was backpacking, but,
That's just terrible.
yeah.
And how long were you doing that in one particular space? How long?
Oh, I can just say I did not complete my 88 days. I left that onion farm and just enjoyed the remaining year, and then I went home.
Well, I guess who could handle it? Because to me it was just outrageous that expectation.
And it's also nothing you would expect happen in a country like Australia.
And we don't hear of it.
It is shocking. And yeah, and there's so many like my story, okay, wage theft, illegal retention of passport, okay, I didn't know it was illegal, now I know, but there's so many worse case scenarios out there. It's sexual harassment, assault, accidents, like fatal accidents.
Absolutely. And the list goes on with that level kind of precipitates that environment for other behaviours to be kind of allowed and exploited of workers.
And it is important because this film I'm making, demonstrates that modern slavery is it is occurring in Australia today.
And we have to kind of realize we have to call it for what it is. There's no sugarcoating it. It is actually a form of modern slavery. And it's sort of, we kind of try and cloak it to say employment, but in actual fact there is very little notion of employment, because employment sort of has that connotation that it's legal and fair, and in this case it's not fair. Now, Andrew, over to yourself. Tell us how did you become involved in this area?
So my partner at the time was being exploited on a grape farm, and I was kind of desperate for help because I had told her, look, don't worry, when you come to Australia, we have work protection, all of this stuff. But I found even trying to navigate this as an Australian was just next to impossible, because Fair Work only investigate maybe less than 10% of cases that come to them. And, it's like that legal loophole that Christina was talking about. Because the government has put this legal loophole in, to the piece rate. Piece rates should be paying the casual hourly rate plus 15%. And if you're on a vineyard, it should be plus 20%. So ideally, if you're doing a piece rate, you should be getting paid about $28 to $30 an hour almost. Unfortunately, the loophole that the government's put in place, which farmers have and other big corps have exploited, is that they can choose who the average competent picker is. Now, unfortunately, the average competent picker isn't gendered. It isn't, it's not fit for purpose for, say, if you're injured at work or if you have a disability, because we've seen these farming groups, now that COVID has hit and there's been less access to backpackers, they want to expand the scheme to include work for the dole and the DSP. So that's kind of scary in that regard, because you'll have able-bodied people earning more than their disabled peers, or in some cases on farms we have women earning much less than men, even though they're doing the same hours as the men are. Or on berry farms it can be the opposite. Women earn way more than men do, because the dexterity in the fingers or something a farmer told me. But yeah, so it's an inherently unfair system, and it's a system that's easily to exploit, because the farmer can say, oh well, this worker was just lazy, they never met our average competent picker rate. And that's where you get stories like Christina's, where they're paying people $4 an hour because they've set the average competent picker rate so high, no one would be able to achieve that. So I got involved because my partner, she was getting paid 20 cents a vine to pick grapes in Queensland, and she was working 12-hour days and only earned $50 to $60 a day for picking the grapes. Now I as you know, an Australian, thinking, oh well, this isn't right, I'll call the employer, called up the farm and said, hey mate, what's going on? I saw this picking rate, you're only paying them $50 an hour, what's your average competent picker rate? And the farm told me, oh well, that's not our fault, that's we hire a labour hire company and they're in charge of setting the picking rate. I'm like, yeah, but you're the farm, you tell them how much they can pick. I'm like, oh no, but the labour hire company pays them, blame the labour hire company. So I called the labour hire company then blamed the farmer. So they're using each other as a way to kind of defer responsibility. But after I'd made that call, they went around and knocked on all the girls' caravans and said, whose boyfriend's causing us trouble? Because they'd already been done by Fair Work before. We're going to find out who it is, and we're going to get rid of you. And you know, that's when I had to get the AWU involved. And after they got involved, she started getting paid hourly. But yeah, it was kind of a hectic time. And when we were looking for work for her, we did this thing where I would call the farmer first as an Australian looking for work, and say, because you know, the myth is that farmers are desperate for Australian workers, they can't get enough Aussies in the farm, that's why they need these backpackers. So I called them up and said, hey, I'm an Aussie looking for work, do you have any work, how much does it pay, blah blah blah. The average response I got was, oh, we don't have any work for you. I would then get Queena to call up like maybe 5 minutes later. Queena was being Chinese. They said, oh yeah, we've got work for you and we'll put you on straight away, when do you want to come up? But she was getting offered much below the average wage that, you know, an Australian should be paid. So, and we had one experience where a farmer had contacted her because she was having trouble on the farm she was at, and said, oh, you know, I'll give you a job, but you know, he wanted to see her urinate on a tree before he'd give her the job. And I tried reporting it to the country police. They didn't want to do anything about it. Melbourne police, I called here, they said, yep, we'll try and pressure them, but nothing happened. But this is the story. I mean, with my group, 88 Days and Counting, we get a lot of, especially women, told that they're being sexually harassed. We'll try and call the police in the area, and then the police are like, oh no, nothing we can do. She's not going to stay here very long. Her visa finishes anyway. There's not much point, you know. So some of the country police are being kind of compliant in the abuse. So, yeah.
And that's terrible because, you know, and I think, as you both alluded to, if this was an Australian worker that this was happening to, there'd be so many alarm bells and so much media coverage about sexual exploitation. But the fact it's coming from workers from another country, and then it's coming from workers from particular countries, it's deemed as, oh, well, it's almost like, what do you expect? Or, you know, and it really does show that side of racism that's structurally inbuilt, that we're using, you know, and it goes right back to the start of our colonialised states, where we're exploiting Indigenous workers back in the sugar farms in the 1880s around Queensland, and, you know, having people coming in from all areas and shipping them across, you know, for very, very little. And as you were saying, Christina, having things like your passports held, so you can't do anything. And if you make trouble or you raise your voice, you lose that prospect of 88-day compliance, which is terrible that they have such a hold over the workers. And it just seems to me that for some reason, governments, and I would say all governments, doesn't matter which government's in power, doesn't really want to change this, because it obviously seems to create a purpose. I'll ask either of you, have either of you looked at, like, to try and get figures about how much farmers make when, like, say, like a box of particular produce is sent to a supplier?
Well, I heard something on the news the other day. It was an interview with an avocado farmer.
Mm-hmm.
You know how the avocados are so cheap in the supermarket
Mm-hmm.
at the moment? But he was saying that, because, you know, the farms are also struggling because of the big corporations, Woolies, Coles, all of that. And he said that because the avocados are now $1.20 in the supermarket,
Mm-hmm.
they don't make a cent from that. Like, to get any profit, it would have to be $2 or like above.
So what we've got to kind of look at is, dare I say it, places like Woolies and Coles have to have a lot of, where is their moral compass on this issue? And this has been one of the issues around food scarcity and food production, is that we have now the case where we have these conglomerate companies who are dominating all of, say the Australian landscape. We'll just stick to the two for the moment, and they kind of dictate the terms to which producers have to abide by. And it seems to me that the higher you are in terms of a company, the more you're going to make. And the person at the other end, who's the actual worker picking, is very little, yet they're the ones that are the invisible, because the farmer still makes something, you know, but the worker themselves are almost indispensable, you know. And it's like, and it's almost that sad notion of, you know, would a piece of machinery be valued more than the actual worker? Because it seems to me that workers, and as you're saying, Christina and Andrew, we don't hear the horror stories of young people who have their fingers sliced or suffer injuries, like, I'm thinking like snake bites, or being, you know, suffering from allergies, or, you know, or worse, being, you know, sexually assaulted or even murdered. These things that we don't hear of as much, and it's sort of hidden. And until we can kind of get that more and more, and I'm very much looking forward to your movie, because I think we need to really have a really deep think about the way we look at food in this country, and we have to make a look at what is fair, and maybe we have to rethink this notion of what we're paying for. I think for too long people have been just accepted the notion that I want something as cheap as I can get it, and I don't care about the consequences. But as you're saying, Christina and Andrew, there is a consequence for that. And the consequence is the impact it has on the people who are providing you that service. They are the ones who are suffering. They are the people who are being exploited to the point where their bodies are being ruined. And we don't hear the stories too about what happens to these pickers afterwards in 2 or 3 years' time. Is the damage done? If you're picking something consistently for 12 hours in the heat. And that's the other thing I want to ask you both. What about the terms of the sleeping conditions for that? So if you're working, say, 12 hours and you're not feeling well, what happens, say, if you were not? Because I've read some stories about people being told off if they go to the toilet more than once or twice in an hour. Is that the case?
If there's even a toilet.
Yeah, and I heard that too. There's buckets or in the ground and toilet paper.
Yeah, well, I have a lot to say about the substandard accommodation, overpriced.
Yeah.
People are paying anything from 100 to 250 a week.
So let me hear this straight. Not only are you being paid such a low rate, you even have to pay for your own accommodation.
Yes, and it's in the middle of nowhere, like converted shipping containers. Like people have sent me photos of that. Myself, I stayed in a caravan that looked like it was from 1970. Like,
and I'm just
terrible.
Thinking it's terrible.
But,
you're paying for it. So
yeah.
Not only are you having to earn such very little money, it seems to me it's almost like you're working for nothing, because by the time you pay $2.50 or $3, whatever the cost is for your accommodation.
Oh, but I've heard from people who go in like, okay, today I'm starting my 88 days. It might take them 6 months because it's not every day you get work.
Yeah.
They pay accommodation and they leave with less money than they had when they started. Some people end up in debt and they just need to stay and work on, and they can't get out of there because they have to pay back. So it's like debt bondage, and
they're also paying transport costs to work.
$10 a day often.
Yeah, it's like, so the farmer will collect them from the caravan park or whatever. I mean, this is what happened with my partner, and then they have to pay $10 or $20 a day or each time they use the transport. So, a lot of these working holiday makers, they ended up kind of in indentured labor, because some of the working hostels will promise, oh, yep, come up, we have work for you, you'll finish your 88 days quick. They'll end up in the hostel, and then the hostel will say, oh, actually, there's no work at the moment, you'll just have to wait. So in the meantime, they're paying these hostels and getting more and more in debt, waiting for work that they were promised before they got up there. They're stuck in a remote location. A lot of the times there's no train station or bus or whatever to get them out of there. So they're just waiting until this work magically appears to finish their days and get on with things. Yeah.
I read somewhere that in some spaces that workers had to pay exorbitant fees for toilet paper, that the work sites would not provide any of that, and it was disgusting that they were really making money, and I will say, like, on the blood of the workers. Everything, even water wasn't allowed. You had to pay. There was that kind of keeping of tallies of how many times that person drank water, and God forbid if you had a piece of fruit, you'd be in big trouble. You'd be deducted for that. So was that your experience, Christina, in terms of if you were that hungry, like with food, what was the situation with food on the farms for your experience?
Oh, well, you got to bring your own lunch, like sort your own food. I wasn't, I couldn't really snack on an onion.
I was going to say that for that bit, yeah. But I guess that would be the case that if you were, God forbid, take an onion in your own bag, you'd probably be almost reprimanded and paid for that. Like, there was such stringent. What about in terms of surveillance? Did you find that on the farms or from interviewing people that they were constantly being watched all the time?
Yeah, like, and hitting really hard on no talking. Like,
okay.
like people working in packing sheds, for example, and they're just like doing the same automated thing over and over for 8 hours, but it was like shh whenever someone, I don't know, talked amongst each other, stuff like that. Strange. And had one guy got fired because he was on his phone in his lunch break.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
And what about, I heard stories too about that fear of, like, you have to have a strong disposition because you have mice running around, in the fields and snakes.
Oh God. Yeah, and there's no health and safety, all like people coming from, Europe, other countries, we're not used to snakes, stuff.
A lot of these places don't have first aid or snake bite kits or anti-venom available. And if you do need anti-venom, it's usually like a couple of 100-kilometer flight to the nearest town that does have it. And, there's no training for these people coming in, like telling them bushfire awareness or snake or spider bite awareness or anything like that.
Yeah, nothing like that.
We had reports from a backpacker who the farmer was joking that, the river he was in was croc infested and he had to go and fix the fence in there. And obviously the backpacker was quite scared about that. But, there was no kind of training for them on, croc awareness or, anything like that.
The trauma of being in that situation where you're dependent upon that little bit of money, yet you'll be put into those high-risk situations. And dare I say that horrible word of cancer, because sun exposure to those elements, being in that sun. So I was thinking, Christina, having some people come from countries where their skin wasn't used to the conditions in Australia and becoming badly sunburned. Were there reports of that? Did you find about people really damaging their skin as a result of
yes, but not only the sun, the the juices from mangoes, from lime, blisters all over, and then paired with the burning sun.
A good point with the sun, though, is like we had quite a prominent case here in Australia where a backpacker from Belgium had died from heat stroke. He wasn't used to the Australian climate, but also they refused to provide water for him. And, he fainted and they just kind of left him there, sort of thing. Because there wasn't appropriate shading. There wasn't, anywhere for them to get water to cool down. And there's no heat restriction laws. So like in construction, which is another industry backpackers work in, there's a tools down if the heat gets over, like what is it, 35 or something like that?
Yeah, 35.
But in horticulture and agriculture, there is no tools down heat restriction. So farmers can say on a 40-degree day, most don't, but you get the odd
person that will do it to make the money.
Yeah, because they're like, oh, well, if I leave my fruit out in this heat, they're all going to die and I'm not going to be able to sell it. So we need to get it off now. So let's start picking. So yeah, there's a lot of compliance and negligence, sorry, not compliance. There's very little compliance in the industry, which is what we're trying to change.
Yeah, I have this Canadian backpacker told me that the farmer he was working on a mango farm, and the farmer refused to give them any water. And it was 35 degrees. He fainted and dropped a mango in front of the farmer. The farmer then saw that as disrespectful and fired him. Like, how bad is that?
And no recourse. There's no recourse for that.
These are human beings, and they're treated like.
But again, this is promoted as a cultural experience, and I'm so glad you brought up the historical context, Ricky, as well, because you know we did have people from Indigenous and other culturally diverse backgrounds blackbirding in Australia for quite a long time. And for the working holiday visa to be promoted as this cultural experience, I mean, Rosie's daughter there, who started the 88 days, she was from Jamaican and Asian descent. But, you know, they were telling her that picking sugarcane in Australia, coming to Australia, doing your 88 days and picking sugarcane for next to nothing is a cultural experience. I mean, that's just madness. And like, what message are we sending out to the world as Australians to say, yep, come here, but if you want to stay a bit longer because you love the country and you love the people, you better go out and do some farm work for next to nothing. You know, Australia is one of the few countries in the world that has this mandatory agricultural requirement for for a second-year visa. Australians don't do this when we go to England or Europe or America or these other countries. You know, we have people from black backgrounds picking cotton in Australia, marketed as a cultural experience. You know, what kind of culture are we promoting if that's our cultural experience?
Well, it's a culture of exploitation,
yeah.
Isn't it? There's no other, you can't color code it any other way. It's actually exploitation, and it's beyond that. It's actually downright murderous, because, you know, having people work for so many hours on such a repetitive, dangerous task where you have risk for spider bites, higher risk for snake bites, you know, you're in the elements of lack of, you know, proper sanitation, you know, restricted access to water. You know, the body can only take so much, and I'm just amazed that there hasn't been a greater chance, a greater push for more royal commissions into this. And I wonder, you know, who's stopping who in this space, because, and this is the thing that I'm always questioning about politics, and we're looking at elections, why the so-called national, you know, country parties don't, you know, whose interests are they looking after? It's quite clear they don't care about the workers. They're more concerned about the farmer. But, you know, we have to start looking more deeper. And as I mentioned earlier on, when we're looking at our food, what we eat every day, we all can make a difference. And I would hope that we can start up a movement where people start ethically considering everything you put in your mouth. Where has it come from? You know, when you're going to a space and you're buying cheap fruit, or you're going to a space at Woolies, you know, there should be some system that says this fruit has been ethically produced, you know, and it has to be a standard that if the people are paid a certain wage, and it should be a wage, you know, we need to move away from this so-called piecework, that it's an outmoded way of work. And it has no place, you know, in modern, postmodern societies. You know, piecework is something that, you know, the last elements of people with intellectual disabilities were given that, you know, as a tokenism. And this is what I call it, as a tokenistic way of working. It doesn't really take into account. But the reality is we all need food. and this is what gets to me. And I think we have to change the human condition into the mindset, Yes, maybe we have to pay more for food. That's what we have to think about. Yes, maybe we have to stop thinking of purchasing cars or other luxuries, and realizing that food is a luxury, and we should be paying for it accordingly, so that people are not, dying to support other people. So I really do hope, Christina, and Andrew, that when the film comes out, that we can really have everybody watching that, especially students at high schools and primary schools, so we can start an awareness campaign from day one, that people can start realizing that food, it doesn't just come from Woolies with your lovely green aproned smiling faces. It actually comes from the point of the growth of the person picking that fruit for you or vegetable, because that's what's not being heard of. That's what's missing out. And I am so happy that both of you have highlighted some of this. Now, you've got a few events coming up that's quite very important. Could you maybe, Christina or Andrew, speak to some of the events that people can kind of learn a bit more about it?
All right, well, so in about 2 weeks' time, the 4th of November, Andrew and I will be attending the White Horse Greens Speaker Night, where we're doing a bit of crowdfunding for the film and talking about the advocacy group, 88 Days and Counting.
That's wonderful. Now, I know there's a lot of passionate people out there who would love to be involved in this project. And how can they assist you if they would love to be part of the journey? How can they get in touch with you? Is there a website that people can reach out to you?
Yes, there is. It's www.88daysaslave.com. So you can maybe share that with this video.
Absolutely, we will be doing that.
And you can contact email through that website.
Absolutely, and let's try and get something happening. So again, go for it, Andrew.
My group is 88 Backpackers 88 Days and Counting on Facebook. It's a private group, but we are looking for volunteers, and we are working on expanding and becoming a proper non-for-profit. But yeah, at this point, we're in kind of the volunteer phase. But if anyone wants to help, you can contact me or Christina through there.
Yeah, and people should really tune into this speakers night where we'll be sharing more information.
And that's where I really encourage everyone listening, especially teachers out there. If you're wanting to get your students now that they're back in their classrooms and you really want to get some hands-on activities that you can do with your students, I would strongly encourage you to consider, coming along to the event, having a chat with Andrew and Christina, and seeing how your school can become involved in this unique experience and make a change and support this movement to finally really let's get rid of this notion of piecework in Australia, and that we really start paying people, real wages for work, for food. We all need to eat food. We all benefit from it. There's not one human being on this world or this country that doesn't benefit from the luxury of safe food that's been has been regulated, and it's time that we start considering how can we support, and even the ideas, like I was just thinking, even if we can all contribute, that if we're shopping somewhere, Woolies or Coles, that we say that every $1 or $2 out of a shop that people can then send to an organisation like where we've got here, we could set up that contribute to having workers be fully supported so they don't end up being exploited anymore, or we don't forget about the memory of what took place with Rosie. We really need to consider that. So it's been a wonderful chat, both of you. I hope you can come again and we can have a chat after the event for 2 weeks' time to see where we go from here, and maybe we can plot along the next couple of months the stages where your journey is at, and even consider having a forum and I think I'd love to encourage people to consider. We'll have an open Q&A session, perhaps later in the year or early next year, where people can come and hear Andrew and Christina speak more about this important area, and maybe we might get one or two other panelists as well, just to give us more insight into why we need to do something urgently to stop this. Again, thank you both for spending your time today, and we look forward to speaking with you further, and we'll provide all the links with this video that people can access. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.